All right, let's just get right into it. When I say medieval nun, what pops into your head? I'm guessing it's not a bunch of foul-mouthed, rebellious women running a convent like some kind of wild sorority. But, a recent comedy film, The Little Hours, showed us exactly that. So, today we're going to pull back the curtain, look at the history behind the habit, and figure out what life was really like for these women. For most of us, that image of a medieval nun is pretty set in stone, right? You picture a life of quiet prayer, deep thoughts, and just total devotion to God. It's this stereotype that's been burned into our brains for centuries through art and books. A life totally cut off from the messy, complicated world outside the convent walls.
And then you've got the movie The Little Hours. One recap describes it as a story about, and I quote, 3 thirsty nuns who do all kinds of activities to quench their thirst. And let me tell you, those activities involve everything from drinking and witchcraft to just, pure chaos. It's a completely different picture, to say the least.
So that really sets up the big question for us. Which one is closer to the truth? Were these convents these peaceful, holy places? Or were they something a lot more complicated? Well, as you can probably guess, the real story is somewhere in the messy middle. To even begin to answer that, we first have to understand why a woman would even join a convent. And to do that, you have to look at the pretty slim pickings she had for options in the medieval world. Because for a lot of them, it wasn't really a choice between a husband and God. It was a choice of how to survive. Seriously, let's just try to put ourselves in their shoes for a second. Imagine you're a young woman, your husband just died in some war, and now you've got a baby to feed. What do you do? I mean, where do you even start? This wasn't some thought experiment. It was the brutal, everyday reality for so many women. Their entire survival hinged on a tiny handful of socially acceptable paths.
And historians have basically boiled it down to 4 main honorable options. First, the most obvious one, get remarried, though that often meant you had to prove your first husband was actually, dead. Second, you could go into domestic service, become a servant. A third choice was to take on piecework at home, maybe sewing or making candles. And then there was that fourth option, religious life.
Now that last option, joining a convent, it wasn't always some profound spiritual calling. For many, many women, it was an economic decision that was made for them. Convents basically became these holding pens for daughters that families just couldn't afford to marry off. And the main reason for this was a financial problem that historians actually call dower inflation. Basically, over time, the price of a dowry, all the money and goods a bride's family had to pay the groom's family, it just went through the roof. It made getting your daughter married a massive, massive financial hit. And the result of that was pretty stark. As one historical analysis puts it, for a lot of upper-crust families, it became literally impossible to marry off more than one daughter. So if you've got 2, 3, 4 daughters, what are you supposed to do with the rest of them? Well, the convent was the cheaper option. And you know what? This is one of the most historically spot-on parts of the movie. The character Alessandra is basically a prisoner there. Her own father tells her to her face that he can't afford her dowry, that the family coffers are empty. She is in that convent not because she chose it, but because her family's bank account demanded it. Okay, so the movie absolutely nails the economic pressures, but when we get to the more, let's say, sensational parts of the story, it starts to take some pretty big creative liberties.
I mean, the climax of the film has a full-on witch coven happening in the woods. You've got naked nuns dancing around a bonfire, getting ready to sacrifice a guy for some kind of ritual. It is a wild, unforgettable scene. It is also, historically speaking, completely out of place. And here's the crucial thing. Historians point out that this specific idea of witchcraft, the satanic covens, the rituals, that's an early modern concept. It's the kind of witch panic you see in the 1500s and 1600s, not the 1300s, which is when the movie's supposed to take place. So, while the whole witchcraft thing was pure fiction, the movie's focus on sexuality in the convent, well, that actually taps into something that's surprisingly complex and, historically documented. Which, of course, brings us to the big question that's kind of hanging over this entire topic. We know there were supposed to be these celibate brides of Christ, but what was the reality? Did it happen? Well, the historical record is actually pretty clear. While the huge majority of nuns were probably totally celibate, there was what historians call an active minority who were not. We have records of nuns sneaking out, of men sneaking in, and of actual relationships happening. And it probably helps to remember that the men they dealt with the most, priests, often had a terrible reputation themselves.
There was a law from 12th century Muslim-ruled Spain that literally told women not to go into churches unless they had to, because, it claimed, priests were, and I'm quoting here, evildoers, fornicators, sodomites, and just couldn't be trusted. Celibacy was supposed to be the rule for them too, but it was a rule that got broken a lot. And this is where the story gets really fascinating. For the truly devout, celibate nuns, sexuality didn't just vanish. Instead, it was transformed. It was channeled into this incredibly intense, mystical devotion to Jesus that was, surprisingly, very physical and very romantic. And we know this from the nuns' own writings. They wrote about these ecstatic visions of kissing and embracing a very buff Jesus. The famous Saint Catherine of Siena even wrote about her mystical marriage to Christ, where his foreskin was her wedding ring. I'm not making that up. Religious art at the time even showed Christ's side wound in a way that looked a lot like female anatomy, and it became this object of intense devotion. This was a faith that was deeply physically passionate. So after digging into the economics, the fiction, and the very surprising reality of their faith, where does this all leave us? Let's try to pull all these threads together. Look, the most important thing to take away from this is that the reality was just so much more complicated than either the saintly stereotype or the raunchy movie. The truth isn't one or the other. It's a messy, fascinating mix of both and a whole lot more. At the end of the day, these were real women. Some were incredibly pious, some felt like they were trapped in a prison, and most were probably somewhere in between. They were all just trying to navigate a world that was defined by intense spiritual beliefs, brutal economic realities, and their own very real, very human desires. And it's such a powerful reminder of how easily a complex human story can get flattened into a simple caricature, whether it's the perfect saint or the wild sinner. It really makes you wonder, what other parts of history are we totally misunderstanding just because we'd rather have a simple story than the complicated truth?